Well, to discuss a more formal survey, the 2025 VentureBeat AI survey, sponsored by ActiveFence, our very own Matt Marshall, folks.
Hello, everyone, again. So every year we've been doing an AI survey at VentureBeat where we're or asking our readers how they're interacting with AI. So obviously, beginning around 2016, it was a different type of AI. And a couple of years ago, I think 3 years ago, we started asking about generative AI. And then just this last year, we started for the first time talking about agentic AI. And so we haven't published the survey yet. So you are hearing the first kind of exclusive insights from this survey of more than 2,000 people. We've done the filtering, so of those 2,000, selected who were from enterprise and some other qualifications. And so this will be in the form of a report that I think all of you will be able to get after the event at some point when our team has it ready. But we were just going to talk through some of the findings, and I think this is going to be fresh. It's off the presses just over the last several weeks. I think there's one thing that I've noticed is that our readers are going to be folks following VentureBeat's coverage are going to be maybe a little more advanced than kind of the average respondent, even if we are qualifying them as enterprise or not. And so just keep that in mind. And I think also the recency of the survey, right, just the last several weeks, it shows some really interesting ramp up in a few areas. So let's move to slide number 1. So the first question, we have many questions. We're going to select a few here that were particularly interesting. So what stage is your organization at in adopting multi-step tool using agents? And what you see here is that there's a very high deployment rate in enterprise as well. So if it's about 70% overall, some of these slides are hard. Actually, we're moving quickly, hard to totally understand. But what I'll do is break it down. But basically, essentially what this slide is showing is that there's significant deployment around 70%. Enterprise is at 67% once you filter out who is from real enterprise. And I think the definition was over 200 employees, or was it 500 employees? I can verify that in terms of size. So let's move to the next slide. Actually, go back to, the previous slide real quick. And it basically, next one. And basically, as you go to the left, what you're doing is you're getting to more sophisticated forms of deployment, right? So no plans, and you're exploring and pilot, and then you got the internal, and then actually customer facing. So it shows that going up over time. So let's go to the next slide. So again, this one's kind of hard to read from the bar. There's not a lot of differentiation in those bars. They're all around the same size, around 3. What that means, basically, though, is the question here was, what metrics do you use to measure ROI? And the fact that most of those lines are similar is that there's no clear consensus, right? And so basically, respondents were asked to force rank which one of these buckets was mattering to them for metrics, and you see that there's no one answer. So that's interesting in terms of that there's no consensus there. Let's move on to the next slide. So this question is, how satisfied are you with the outcomes of your AI initiatives? And this first part of the slide is basically only 48%, this may actually be a big number, right? But 48% are reporting high satisfaction with their outcomes of their AI initiatives. Half the teams, though, are remaining uncertain. And so let's go to the second part of this. And this shows that many teams are feeling confident without frameworks or safety plans, right? So the first chart, this wording is relatively small. I could read it out for you, but basically, a good quarter of folks feel confident even with no framework in place, particular structure in place for AI governance and so on. And then the second one is a full 10% don't have a plan for a safety team, but they're confident. And then 5% are confident even though they lack both of those. So we thought that was interesting to call out. The next slide, please. So the next question is, have you implemented an agentic framework? And so what we thought was interesting is that as you had the implementation of a framework, your satisfaction went up, right? So 62.8%, if you had full implementation, you were rating satisfaction between 8 to 10 out of 10. If you were only partially implementing a framework, an agentic framework, then you were actually satisfied around 41.9% of the time. And if you had nothing, it was 33%. So moving right along to a couple more before we move on to another segment here. So this question is, what are the biggest blockers to agentic AI adoption? And this slide is a little busy as well, but basically, if you start with a right, basically you have a breakdown of things like budget, regulatory, executive sponsorship. What we did is we broke out the tech talent on the left, right? Because we found that even though that wasn't seen as a particularly big blocker relative to some of these others, right? It was actually lower. When you break it out, what we found was that the teams that had agentic systems in place, the ones that were more advanced, were identifying tech talent more greatly, right? If you were at a pilot stage or planning, then it was only 22% as reporting talent as a blocker. And then so final one here is the question here was, do you have an AI safety plan in place? 52% said yes. Nearly 10% said no, not at all, right? And there was some in-betweens. But we found that was really interesting, that it was interesting that Andrew Ng was talking about the need to actually put some of these things later on in the process so you actually can get moving with your project. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce someone special here, Katie Ziegelman from ActiveFence. She's the SVP of Marketing. Come on, Katie. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
So Katie and her team actually helped make this survey possible. So we've been doing this every year, but Katie's team at ActiveFence came along and worked with us on some of the safety questions, which aligns with some of your company's goals, right, and some of your specialty. And so we're just going to go over a few of the safety related questions. So that last slide, Katie, was showing that 10% of respondents had no dedicated safety plan, right? And some of these even had external applications, right? External facing applications with some of their customers. So from your working with clients at ActiveFence, what are some of those blind spots?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. As we look at the numbers, one thing that is also interesting is a year ago, I think the percentage of people who have safety plans was even lower. So the trajectory of how people are starting to incorporate safety is really important, and we anticipate, a year from now it'll look very different. And the reason for that is these risks we're talking about. So companies who have these safety plans in place understand that the risks of things like prompt injection and jailbreak attacks. With those, bad actors can actually get access to data that they shouldn't have access to, including personal customer information. Can also allow them to trick the system. So we've all seen examples of, customer support bots giving refunds that they shouldn't, or qualifying applicants for loans that they shouldn't have access to. So with things like prompt injection and jailbreaks, we're really seeing the data leakage components and then also tricking the system.
Okay, thanks, Katie. So this was another question that we didn't go over earlier, but 32% of respondents are using multi-agent collaboration. So nearly half of which are in production. Interestingly, what attack vectors or safety risks are emerging when you get to this multi-agent stage?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So typically our safety layers just look at the input and the output. And when you start pulling in multi-agent, you have the input, and then you're going to external sources where you could have data poisoning. You then have the reasoning components to think about, and we know that models can be very deceptive. And then we also have tool calling where we can unknowingly actually create a cyber attack. And then we have the output. So there's so many different layers and so many different interaction points that now introduce more risk.
Okay. So 69% of teams are in production. We saw that on the first slide with agentic AI, but satisfaction remains mixed. There is a pressure to deploy fast. Again, Andrew Ng referred to this as an advantage. People want to, but so we've got to balance that with safety. What is the minimal viable safety framework that you recommend?
Yeah, so there are a lot of different frameworks out there. I would say at a bare minimum, the most important thing is don't go to production blinds. Make sure that you have the appropriate visibility, the appropriate detection tools in place. And what we see is there's really no excuse to not consider safety and security. For example, at ActDefense, we offer a guardrails and observability platform, and we're directly integrated with places like NVIDIA's NeMo guardrails and Amazon's Bedrock. So it's really easy to have the right tools in place to make sure that you have the appropriate visibility. That way you can know when there are attacks, and then you choose if you want to toggle on controls or not. So bare minimum, make sure you have that visibility so you can really trust your AI.
Okay, Katie, thank you very much. I think you've got a little room there along the hallway on the left, right? A lounge where people can go in and play
going
Connect
this way, turn right and come play some games and get to know a little bit more about what we're up to.
Here over the next day or two. Okay, great. Thank you, Katie, for joining
Thanks,
us.
everyone.
Thanks.